Welcome back to the deep dive. We've got a really substantial stack of sources today on a topic called the gospel-shaped life.
It's a huge topic.
It is, yeah. It's so vast you can kind of get lost in the weeds pretty easily. So our goal today is precision. We're going to try to boil this all down by tackling 4 foundational questions that the source material uses to structure the whole system.
That's right. And our mission here isn't really to, summarize a religion. It's more about extracting the core intellectual difference between the gospel and, well, pretty much any other belief system, whether it's spiritual or secular.
Okay.
We really need to nail down this distinction between news and advice, and then see how that one difference kind of filters down and changes everything. The motivation for our ethics, our cultural outlook. If you're looking for a clear framework, this is for you.
Okay, let's unpack that right at the start then. What exactly is the gospel? Because the answer in the material is a very sharp cut. It defines it as news, not advice.
And this is the absolute essential difference. I mean, think about what advice does. Advice is counsel, right? It's given to help you get something done, to reach a goal. And that inherently puts a burden of performance right onto you.
Right. If you fail, the advice didn't fail, you failed.
Exactly. You failed to follow it. You get advice on how to, improve your investments or be more resilient or find enlightenment. The focus is always on what you're doing, your output.
Whereas news is something else entirely.
Fundamentally different, yeah. News is a report that something important has already happened in history, usually by someone else, and you just have to respond to that fact. It takes the burden of accomplishment off of you.
And the sources say that almost every other major belief system was founded by a prophet or a sage.
Offering advice.
Offering advice on how to find God, how to reach nirvana, balance your karma, whatever it is.
But hang on, is that distinction a little too simple? I mean, don't other traditions have claims about, divine intervention or some kind of unique revelation? How does the material justify saying Christianity is completely unique in this?
It bases the claim on the founder himself. So
Right, yeah.
every other system has someone saying, here is the path to God, you need to walk this way.
Right, here are the steps.
Exactly. Christianity is the only one founded by someone who claimed, I am God and I've come to find you, having already done what humanity couldn't do. It's the difference between being handed a map and being picked up by a rescue helicopter.
That idea of the finished work.
Yeah.
That really is the point of the spear, isn't it? The material is so emphatic about this. The gospel isn't just something that comes through Jesus Christ. It is Jesus Christ and him crucified.
Yeah.
It's all about relying on what was done, not what we do.
And this isn't just an abstract idea. I mean, historically, it translated into this intense personal feeling of freedom. We have these amazing historical accounts of people feeling this burden physically drop away.
Like the story of William Holland, the early Methodist.
Oh, that one's fantastic.
Yeah. He was converted just by hearing Martin Luther's commentary on Galatians being read out loud. And the words that hit him were Luther saying, what have we then? Nothing to do? No, nothing, but only accept of him.
And Holland wrote that his great burden fell off in an instant, and he just burst into tears of peace.
It is the total opposite of self-help. And you see the same thing with Nathan Coles, this barely literate farmer in Connecticut back in the 1740s.
Right.
He heard the preacher George Whitefield, and it just shattered his whole worldview. He said his old foundation was broken up because he realized that my righteousness could not save me. The burden of trying to earn God's favor just gone.
And that realization seems to be the key. But, this brings up a really crucial warning in the sources. It's incredibly easy for Christianity, even evangelical Christianity, to slip right back into advice giving. Back into legalism.
Putting the burden right back on.
Exactly.
And the sources talk about 2 main forms of this. First, you have the traditional kind that most people recognize.
Yeah.
Extra biblical rules or rituals that kind of imply God will only be pleased if you follow them. That's a clear performance burden.
Sure. But the second form is trickier. The source calls it liberal evangelical legalism. And it's hard to spot because it focuses on really good things.
Right, like peace, justice, inclusivity.
World renewal. But if becoming a Christian is defined by doing those things, if the message is you have to do justice to be a Christian, well, then it's still advice, isn't it? It's not news.
It's a paradox of motivation.
Yeah.
Of course, the gospel calls us to do justice and seek peace, absolutely. But if that's the entry point, you're right back to an advice structure. It's an implicit burden. The correct understanding flips it. The finished work, the news, is what produces the desire for justice.
And when it's really understood that way, the result is this bubbling joy and release that people described. Charles Wesley's hymn, my chains fell off, my heart was free.
Which flows right into our second big question. Does the gospel just save us, or does it actually shape how we live? A lot of people draw a neat line there. Gospel saves, the law guides.
And while the law is obviously still the guide for God's will, it tells us what to do, the sources argue that separation is intellectually insufficient.
It's too neat. It's insufficient because the law, all by itself, can't give you the motivation you need or the deepest perspective. The gospel doesn't replace the law. It gives you the lens to understand its depth, and, this is critical, it supplies the motivation to actually want to fulfill it.
You can see this really clearly in ethical examples, like that story of the TV network boss.
Oh, yeah.
His subordinate makes this career-ending mistake, but he goes to his own bosses and takes the fall for her, losing a ton of his own credibility.
And she's just baffled. She presses him on why he would do that. And he explains it in gospel terms. He says, I'm a Christian, and my whole life is based on a man who took the blame for me.
Okay, but let's challenge that for a second. By taking the blame, wasn't he kind of encouraging incompetence? I mean, where does the source draw the line between grace and just enabling bad behavior?
That is a vital question. And the key is that what the boss did wasn't a mandated rule. It was a spontaneous response. The law didn't require him to take the blame. It wouldn't have been a sin if he'd stayed quiet.
Oh, okay.
But seeing his world through the lens of sacrifice gave him the motivation to go beyond what the rules required. He was demonstrating a kind of generosity that had to have come from somewhere else. It wasn't about enabling incompetence. It was about showing grace that actually costs something.
And that cost-based motivation is just as powerful in social issues, like when Paul confronts Peter in Galatians for refusing to eat with the Gentiles.
Right. Paul doesn't pull out a rule book and cite a no racism law.
No.
He attacks the motivation. He says Peter was not in line with the gospel because racism and prejudice, at their root, they come from insecurity, from a need to feel superior by making other people inferior.
The need to be right.
Exactly. But the doctrine of justification by grace alone is what the source calls the most amazingly leveling thing possible. If you are saved entirely by unmerited favor, you have absolutely no basis for prideful superiority over anyone else, no matter their background.
This mechanism works just as strongly with something like money. When Paul was urging the Corinthians to be generous, he explicitly avoided demanding the 10% tithe from the law.
He deliberately took the legal requirement off the table. Instead, his entire appeal was based on the self-giving of Christ. Though he was rich, yet for your sakes, he became poor. If you're just following the law, you hit 10% and you feel righteous.
Just check the box.
Check the box. But Christ didn't tithe his blood. That motivation based on total undeserved sacrifice. It just kind of blows right past that 10% mark and inspires a totally different level of generosity.
So, okay, this is how character gets built. Titus 2 says the grace of God teaches us to say no to ungodliness. But if I'm completely forgiven, why would I even bother saying no to sin?
Because if you try to avoid sin just for selfish reasons, fear of punishment, fear of looking bad, building your self-esteem, your heart's real desires don't change. You'll still want the sin.
You'll want it more, probably.
Probably.
Yeah.
But ungodliness is really just another word for selfishness. And it's only when you grasp the size of the grace you've received, the fact that your sin grieves the one who sacrificed everything for you, that reality starts to wither the desire for it. It stops being about punishment and starts being about not wanting to betray this incredible love.
Okay, so we've got the motivation. Let's zoom out to the macro level now. If the gospel produces this kind of deep self-sacrificing motivation, what does that gospel-shaped life look like culturally?
At the macro level, the sources use Calvin's phrase to sum it up: you are not your own, you're bought with a price. This leads to a life that's defined by deep unselfishness, a life lived for God and for others.
And this unselfishness is where the cultural critique in the sources gets really interesting because it pulls from secular analysis. Andrew Delbanco tracked the history of hope in America. It started with hope in the glory of God. Then it shifted to hope in the nation, civic virtue, democracy. And today, he argues, hope has shrunk down to just the self, the narrative of self-fulfillment.
And Delbanco's point is that this total focus on self-fulfillment had created a massive cultural crisis, a society built only on individual self-interest. It just can't provide the resources for sacrifice or a stable basis for shared values. It just fragments.
So secularism breeds selfishness, but then the sources bring in Jonathan Haidt's work, which suggests that religion has its own problem.
A different problem, yeah.
Haidt's research implies that organized religion can create unselfishness within the group, but it often leads to tribalism, pride, moralizing, seeing outsiders as less than human.
And that's the dual crisis. On one hand, secularism leads to selfishness. On the other, religion, when it's based on performance and advice, creates unselfishness but fuels this us versus them tribal pride. The argument in the source material is that gospel Christianity is the unique solution because it does two things at once.
What are they?
It gives you deep fulfillment, a purpose bigger than yourself, and it gives you profound humility because being saved by grace completely removes any basis for pride or superiority.
Okay, expand on that humility piece. How does grace actively humble you in a way that makes that kind of tribalism impossible?
Well, tribalism runs on comparing your efforts to someone else's and finding them lacking. It's, I follow the rules better than those people.
Right.
But grace forces a much deeper self-awareness. If you really believe you contributed nothing to your own justification, that you're just as dependent on outside help as the worst person you can imagine, you just can't sustain that kind of pride. The sources say this combination should produce the very best citizens, people known for astonishing unselfishness, and a non-judgmental attitude toward people who disagree.
So the gospel is supposed to solve these huge cultural problems by producing a certain kind of person. Let's zoom in on that. What does that look like day to day? Like, how does this approach something common like discouragement or depression compared to the other options?
The contrast here is super helpful. If you come at a discouraged person with legalism, the answer is all about behavior. Repent of your sin, try harder, read your Bible more.
And if you approach them with relativism, it's all about feelings. Enjoy yourself, build your self-esteem, listen to your inner child.
But the gospel focuses on the heart. It asks a different question. It asks, what has become a pseudo-savior in your life? Where are you looking for your own works righteousness?
Ah. So the despondency isn't just a behavior issue or a feeling issue, it's an identity issue.
It's an identity issue, exactly.
Yeah.
It's coming from an idol, whether that's your career or relationship or your own moral performance, that has inevitably failed you. The gospel frees your heart from needing that idol to be perfect.
And that focus applies to family, too. The gospel frees people from two parental extremes. In more traditional cultures, you have people just shackled by guilt, making their parents' opinion into a kind of pseudo-salvation.
And then, in our individualistic culture, you see this intense anger and entitlement because our parents failed to give us the perfect emotional fulfillment we think we deserved. In both cases, the extreme emotion, the guilt or the anger, it's rooted in needing something from them that only God is supposed to provide.
But when God's love is the foundation of your identity, you're free. You can love your parents without worshiping them and forgive them without hating them. It takes the pressure for perfection off of them.
And you see this with cultural differences, like the example of punctuality. Legalism moralizes it. They're always late. No wonder they have problems. It turns a cultural preference into a moral failing, which leads to paternalism.
While relativism just says, oh, all cultures are wonderful, and ignores actual moral wrongs.
But the gospel gives you a standard to judge what's actually wrong while not moralizing things that just don't matter morally, like whether a party starts on time. It allows for discernment without being judgmental.
My favorite micro-application in the sources was humor. It's such a quick barometer of the heart. A person who operates on legalism, they often don't have a great sense of humor because they're afraid of losing control. They're always ready to say, that's not funny.
Right. And relativistic humor is usually cynical or cutting. It's all about feeling superior by tearing down the bigots or the unenlightened.
But gospel humor lets you laugh at yourself because your identity is totally secure. You don't need to steal self-acceptance from what other people think. That security is what creates real healing humor. The goal isn't to think too much of yourself or too little. It's just to think of yourself less often.
And that shift from constant self-focus to unselfishness, I mean, that's massive internal rewiring. So we've talked about the motivation, but what's the actual mechanism of change? Let's get to that final question. How does this actually happen?
It happens through this concept from Thomas Chalmers, the expulsive power of a new affection.
What a great phrase.
Isn't it? Chalmers said that the heart's desire for some ultimate object of beauty or joy is unconquerable. You can't just beat an old desire down with willpower. An old affection, an idol, has to be kicked out by the expulsive power of a new one.
So you're not emptying the heart, you're changing what fills it. There's that powerful modern story of the woman who was addicted to the love of men. Her whole self-worth was based on their validation.
And her secular counselor correctly saw how fragile that was, but advised her to replace the men with her career and financial independence.
But the woman, who was starting to get this gospel idea, saw the flaw.
Yeah.
She said, "You want me to get rid of a female idolatry and just adopt a male idolatry? I'd just be transferring my fragility to a more politically correct place."
She'd still fall apart just over a business deal instead of a breakup.
That is the critical insight. The change couldn't be external, it had to be internal. And she found freedom by applying Colossians 3, recognizing your life is hidden with Christ in God. So when she felt that old temptation or anxiety, she'd speak to her own heart and say, "You are not my life. Christ is my life."
And that realization that her ultimate fulfillment was secure somewhere else and couldn't be threatened by a relationship, that was the new affection.
And that new, true affection expelled the old one. It gave her the freedom to explore relationships without immediately needing to fall for the guy, because she didn't need him to complete her. The addiction's power just withered, not because she tried harder, but because her heart was won by something more beautiful.
And that really provides a clean summary for this whole deep dive. We've defined the gospel as news, which takes the burden off. This foundational reality then provides a superior ethical standard and a superior motivation through the expulsive power of Christ's love.
And we saw that society faces this dual crisis: secularism breeding selfishness, and religion as self-effort breeding tribalism. The Force material argues that a gospel-shaped life, being both fulfilling and humbling, is the only thing that can solve both of those problems at once.
Which sets up a provocative thought for you to think about. If the gospel-shaped life is supposed to produce this unique, astonishing character, extreme unselfishness with a secure humility, yet the outside world often has trouble telling it apart from the prideful tribalism of mere religion, what's one specific, practical step that can take this week to make the unique, burden-lifting nature of the gospel a little bit clearer and more attractive to the people around you?